This is the TNA Wrestling Final Resolution 2024 full show results video, which takes place at Center Stage in Atlanta, Georgia. The show started with a match between Leon Slater versus the System's JDC. The match starts off with Leon Slater and JDC feeling each other out early on, and Slater showcases his athleticism. JDC then slaps him in the face, and Slater sends JDC to the outside and dives onto him. JDC then pulls Slater off the top rope and grounds him with some strikes and a side Russian leg sweep. JDC then hits Slater with a Falcon Arrow and continues to ground him, and Slater then hits JDC with a Tornado DDT. In the end, Slater sends JDC to the outside with a dropkick and then dives onto JDC again. JDC then rolls Slater up and puts his feet on the ropes for the pinfall victory. We then head to the back, where Gia Miller announces that Hammerstone is unable to compete due to an injury. Jake Something is then asked if he has a replacement and says that he doesn't need any help. The next match happened between Frankie Kazarian versus Jonathan Gresham. The match starts off with Frankie Kazarian blindsiding Jonathan Gresham while he's talking to the official, and Kazarian takes control. Gresham then responds by placing Kazarian in the octopus hold in the ropes and then goes for an early pin attempt. Kazarian then hits Gresham with a forearm and grounds him, and then suplexes Gresham and sends him into the corner. Kazarian then hits Gresham with a back suplex, and Gresham rallies and gets a 2 count with a pin attempt. Kazarian then counters into a chicken wing, but Gresham escapes, and Gresham goes for the octopus and wrenches Kazarian. Gresham then transitions into an armbar, but Kazarian reaches the ropes to break the hold and then chops Kazarian, but Kazarian responds with a slingshot cutter. In the end, both men then go back and forth, and Kazarian gets a 2 count with a pin attempt, and Kazarian then thumbs Gresham in the eye and locks in the chicken wing, forcing Gresham to tap out, and Kazarian won the match. The next match happened between Moose versus Kushida for the X Division Championship. The match starts off with Kushida taking the fight to Moose. Moose then runs at Kushida, but Kushida moves, sending Moose shoulder first into the steel steps. Kushida then continues to control the action and targets Moose's arm, and Moose then gouges Kushida's eyes and slams him. Kushida then goes for the hoverboard lock, but Moose escapes, and Kushida then hits Moose with a Tornado DDT and follows it up with the Back to the Future for a 2 count. Moose then flies off the top, but Kushida catches him in the hoverboard lock. In the end, Moose escapes, but Kushida rolls him up for a 2 count and then flies off the ropes, and Moose hits him with a spear for the pinfall victory to retain the X Division Championship. We then head to the back, where Gia Miller is interviewing First Class, AJ Francis and KC Navarro. Francis and Navarro hypes up the TNA World Championship match set to take place in tonight's main event. Francis then says it is the biggest moment of his career, and then says he has never wanted anything more than to be world champion. Then we saw a 3-way tag team match between the Rascals versus Sami Callihan and PCO versus Jake Something. The match starts off with Sami Callihan and Zachary Wentz, and the Rascals then double team Something, and Something then tags PCO, and PCO overpowers the Rascals. The Rascals then double team Something, and Miguel then super kicks Callihan and dives to the outside. PCO then hits the PCO salt onto several of his opponents, and Miguel then kicks Callihan, but gets slammed by PCO. Something then powerbombs Miguel onto Wentz and powerbombs Callihan and then hits PCO with a powerbomb. Miguel then flies off the ropes and takes down PCO and Something. In the end, the Rascals then super kick Callihan and then hit a double team move on Something and won the match by pinfall. After the match, PCO and Callihan show their respect for the Rascals, and another 23 teaser then plays on the big screen, with a message that says it's just a number. We then head to the back, where Eric Young is having a conversation with Steve Macklin about the 4-way match set to take place later tonight. Young tells Macklin that he has his back in tonight's #1 contenders 4-way match for the TNA World Championship. The next match happened between Ace Austin versus Trent Seven. Austin hits Seven with some strikes and then hits Seven with a dropkick, sending him to the outside. Austin then perseveres and hits Seven with a kick and then briefly takes control. Seven then hits Austin with a burning hammer onto the apron and then slams Austin once again for a 2 count. Seven counters the Art of Finesse and hits a lariat on Austin and then hits Austin with a piledriver. Austin then counters the burning hammer and hits a DDT on Seven. In the end, Ace Austin hits the Art of Finesse on Seven, then follows it up with the Fold, and defeated Trent Seven by pinfall. The next match happened between Jordynne Grace versus Rosemary. After some time, the match then spills up the ramp, and then a masked individual then pulls the referee out of the ring and attacks Grace and then continue to attack Grace at ringside. The masked individual then gets Grace back in the ring and hits her with several more strikes and then hits Grace with a DDT. The masked individual then unmask and reveal themselves to be Tessa Blanchard, and the match then suddenly ends as a video package for TNA Genesis plays. We then head to the back, where Gia Miller is interviewing Tessa Blanchard about what just happened. Tessa Blanchard says she reminded everyone who this company was built on. Blanchard then says she's back and she's taking what's hers and then shoves Gia Miller and walks off. The next match happened between Joe Hendry vs Josh Alexander vs Mike Santana vs Steve Macklin to become the #1 contender for the TNA World Championship. The match starts off with Mike Santana gaining an early advantage with a dropkick through the ropes, and then Santana takes the fight to Alexander. Hendry then hits Alexander with a clothesline and then slams Alexander. Santana then nails Macklin with a kick and Macklin nails Santana with a lariat, and Hendry then nails Macklin with a cutter. Alexander then trips Santana and he lands on the apron and then hits Macklin with several German suplexes. Hendry then rallies, but Alexander hits him with a dragon screw and targets his leg, and Hendry fires up, but Alexander hits him with a shot to the face. Alexander then sends Hendry to the outside. Santana and Alexander then trade shots and Santana chops Alexander, but gets suplexed. Santana then hits Alexander with a cutter and then hits the street sweeper on Alexander. Macklin hits Hendry with a knee and Alexander takes control. All four men then battle back and forth. Santana then dives onto Alexander at ringside and Hendry dives onto all of his opponents. In the end, Alexander then gets a zip tie and ties Santana to the barricade and then hits Macklin below the belt, but then Hendry hits Alexander with the standing ovation to win the match by pinfall to become the #1 contender for the TNA World Championship. The next match happened between Masha Slamovich vs Tasha Steelz for the TNA Knockouts World Championship. Prior to the match officially starting, Santino Marella makes his way out and announces the Falls Count Anywhere stipulation being added. Marella also announces that Alicia Edwards is banned from ringside and from the building as well. Tasha Steelz then takes the fight to Slamovich, but Slamovich responds with a clothesline that sends Steelz to the outside. Slamovich then dives onto Steelz and several members of the security team, and then Steelz suplexes Slamovich on top of the steel steps. Steelz then grounds Slamovich and targets her leg, and Slamovich hits Steelz with a dropkick. Steelz then sends Slamovich on the apron and nails her with a DDT onto the floor, then Slamovich hits Steelz with a superplex. Steelz then hits Slamovich with a cutter on the ramp, and both women then brawl at the top of the stage. In the end, Tasha Steelz hits Slamovich with a bulldog, and Slamovich then hits Steelz with a stiff shot and follows it up with a piledriver, and won the match by pinfall to retain the TNA Knockouts World Championship. Then we saw a tables match between the Hardys vs the System for the TNA World Tag Team Championship. The match starts off with both teams brawling, and the Hardys then take control early on. Eddie Edwards then crotches Jeff Hardy on the ropes, and the System takes control and then slam Matt Hardy through a table. Edwards and Myers then gang up on Jeff Hardy. Matt Hardy then rejoins the fight, and the Hardys rally and then hits Myers with a twist of fate through a table. A fan then slaps Edwards and gets ejected, and the match then briefly spills to the backstage area. Edwards and Myers then double team Jeff Hardy, then Matt Hardy fights Edwards and Myers off with a chair. In the end, Jeff Hardy hits a swanton bomb off a balcony and through a table, and won the match by pinfall to retain the TNA World Tag Team Championship. In the main event of the show, we saw a match between Nick Nemeth vs AJ Francis for the TNA World Championship. Nick Nemeth then nails Francis with a headbutt and super kicks him, and Nemeth goes for the sleeper, but Francis escapes and runs over Nemeth. Francis then runs Nemeth over and slams him onto the apron, and KC Navarro then attacks Nemeth at ringside. Nemeth then goes to slam Francis, but his back gives out and Francis crushes him and then super kicks Francis and follows it up with a powerbomb. Nemeth then hits Francis with a DDT and a slam, and Francis then slams Nemeth, and Navarro then interferes once again and gets ejected from ringside. Nemeth then hits the danger zone for a near fall and then gets a 2 count with a Faymaster. Francis then slams Nemeth for a 2 count and then hits Nemeth with a chokeslam. Francis then sends Nemeth across the ring, and Nemeth hits Francis with a Faymaster and a superkick, then follows it up with a danger zone to win the match by pinfall to retain the TNA World Championship. After the match, KC Navarro attacks Nick Nemeth from behind. AJ Francis and Navarro then gangs up on Nemeth. Joe Hendry then makes his way down to the ring for the save. Hendry and Nemeth then both grab the TNA World title and stare each other down. Nemeth then raises the title and gets in Hendry's face, and both men then argue, and the final resolution goes off the air.